Hey guys, so my journey to build my new PC has begun. The first piece of the puzzle has arrived from Scan, and that first piece of the puzzle is, of course, the CPU. This is the AMD Ryzen 9 5950X, 16 cores, 32 threads, and this is the most expensive Ryzen you can pick up right now. It's the most powerful one, and I think a lot of people will gravitate towards the higher end for gaming and, just as a general all-rounder, but some of these lower end 5000 series CPUs are fantastic as well. Now, if I show you here, if I hold up to the camera, you should be able to see that it is the 5950X, but I'm not going to unbox this today. I'm not going to build anything because this is the only thing which I have so far. What I'd like to do in this video is show you the motherboards that I've been looking at and just talk about my thought process when I've been looking at motherboards on PC Part Picker. Now, I have been looking at cases and I have been looking at coolers and fans and graphics cards, but when you pick up the CPU, the first thing you should really start looking at is the motherboard. Obviously, there are some things that you need to kind of tie in with that, what graphics card you want, whether you're overclocking memory and different things, but definitely the motherboard is what you should be looking at next. So if I jump over to PC Part Picker, I can show you what I've been looking at. Now, if you've not built a PC before, I highly recommend this website. It's absolutely fantastic. It can help you see how other people have built PCs. You can see their builds, their setups. You can see guides. You can see the list of components, and you can see reviews of different components. You can ask questions and all that as well. I kind of use it in a limited way in that I just use it to save my parts and to check compatibility. And that's how I used it a few years ago. This is my existing build, which is still a good PC, but when it comes to gaming and video editing, it's starting to get a little bit slow. It's an 8700K Gigabyte Z370 Oris Gaming 7 motherboard, 1080 Ti, etc. Still a great PC, but it is time for a new one, and this is what I have so far. Now, as I said, the CPU is the only thing which I have at this time. It's the only piece of the puzzle which I have. But what I've done right now is just added a selection of different components, the CPU cooler, the memory, the video card. Some of this might end up in the final build, but really at this point, I'm just adding these as a reference build. And this really helps you when you're building a PC and PC Part Picker, certainly from a compatibility point of view. For example, for the video card, I've selected a 3090. Now, I'm kind of leaning towards the 3080. It's the sweet spot right now for graphics cards, best bang for your buck. The reason I've added a 3090 there is just so that when I'm selecting a motherboard, there are boards with 3 slots that I can add a 3090. And that's what's so great about PC Part Picker. It will show you if you don't have the right power supply or the right memory, etc. So I'm on the motherboard page, and you can see there's 131 compatible products for the 5950X here. But if I unselect the compatibility filter, 3,345. So it jumps up quite a lot here. So this is why you use this filter and other filters to kind of narrow things down. Now, obviously what I'll be talking about here is applicable to any kind of PC build, but I will be talking about my AMD chip. And for this particular CPU, there are 3 different boards available, that's a socket CPU. I'm looking for the chipset, which is here. So this is a chipset, and PC Part Picker shows that there's the A520, the B550, and the X570. Now, the X570 boards are more expensive, but they're also newer, and they've got better support for PCI Express Gen 4 and different components, higher quality components, etc., and more features. Generally, it's got more USB ports and different things like that as well. Now, what I would say is that you'll see a lot of people saying you should buy this motherboard or you should buy that motherboard. You do have to look at all motherboards in the market and look at what features are important to you and then go from there. Now, I do think if you're buying a CPU like this and you want to overclock, or you're buying this for gaming, you probably should be gravitating towards the more expensive X570 boards, the ones that have got good thermals, low noise, good overclocking, etc. But the line gets a little bit blurred at some points because the cheaper B550 boards, sometimes those are exactly what you need. You don't need those additional features. You know, some of those B550 boards do have support for PCI Gen 4, but they're maybe limited to one SSD slot or one M2 slot or one PCI Express slot. You know, whereas with an X570, maybe all the slots support PCI Express Gen 4. So what I would say is that for a lot of people, you'll maybe buy an X570 board despite not using those features. So you can save a little bit of money here. Certainly, a motherboard is an area where, yeah, at a certain point, you're spending a lot of money and get, you know, it's a lot of diminishing returns. You're spending a lot of extra money for just a little bit extra. And it gets a little bit blurry as well, because at the top of the B550 range, some of those boards will be better than the bottom of the X570 range. But I don't want to complicate things too much, because I am looking at the AMD X570, which brings it down from thousands to 131 down to 51. And, you know, these boards range from £135 up to, okay, it's saying here 1,227. That's not correct. This is really, the Oris Extreme is a really high-end board, but it's about 700, 750. Just because of the way the automatic pricing here works, it's showing this obscure price from some random Amazon seller, but this is like a 750 board. And the reason it's expensive, you know, it's higher quality capacitors and VRM. It's got a lot of USB ports. It's got really good overclocking features. And this, I believe it's still, at the time of recording, I believe this is one of the only boards that doesn't have a fan for the chipset. It's got passive cooling. So this definitely ticks a lot of boxes, but is this really doing anything more than a 300 board? Not a huge amount, really, if I'm honest. So, well, I'll go into that. So there's a big price difference here, but what I would say is that looking at all the boards in the market, I think that, you know, going from the 150 to 300 range, there is a very strong argument for paying a little bit extra and getting some more of those premium features. You know, maybe a few additional USB ports, maybe better support for PCI Express Gen 4, maybe just better components, or, you know, a board that's better made. But once you go over 300, or even once you go over 250, again, it's the law of diminishing returns, where you're spending a hell of a lot more money for not much more. And you'll see that yourself once you start scrolling down this list of boards. You know, I was looking at, for example, one that's kind of top of my list right now is the Gigabyte Oris Master, which is retailing about 330 with a game. And it really, I mean, this is built just as well as boards which are like 500, 600. You know, this is a fantastic board, high quality. It's got some fantastic features. Gigabyte, for some reason, are still including USB 2.0 at the back of their boards. I don't know why, but, you know, this is a top of the range board without a doubt. And you'll spend a little bit extra and you will get perhaps faster Ethernet. For example, this is 2.5 gigabit. The Extreme has 10 gigabit. But certainly there's a lot of diminishing returns. They're kind of after the 250, 300 mark. Now, I've got 51 products here, but this is where, you know, if you've narrowed it down that you do want an X570 board, this is where you need to start thinking about what is important to you. And what is important to you might not be important to me, and vice versa. For me, I'm looking at a lot of things that I think a lot of people might not be interested in, but it depends on your use case, how you know, you're going to use your PC. Now, I'm guilty of this myself, but sometimes you spend a little bit more with your motherboard because you think, I want to future-proof myself and I don't want to spend extra money later. And there is a strong argument for doing that. For example, I'm thinking about setting up a NAS system later on in the year. So I was looking at 10 gigabit Ethernet and looking at boards that support that. But that brings it down from thousands to 131 to 51 to just three boards that natively have 10 gigabit Ethernet in the board. And as you can see, they're not the cheap ones, the 500 and about 700, 750. So it makes you think, okay, do I really need it? And if I do need it, can I not just buy it with a network card and add it later? Well, of course you can, but then, you know, this means you're spending extra money, but it also means that you're losing a PCI Express card slot. So you need to think about this. And certainly from my point of view, I'm looking for something that I think some people are looking for, but not everyone, and that's Thunderbolt 3. Now, if you're looking for Thunderbolt 3 with this Ryzen series of chips, you've got a couple of options for native Thunderbolt 3 as in it's built into the motherboard. I think there's an ASRock board or two, and there's a Vision D motherboard, I think from Gigabyte. I think it's from Gigabyte, and there's like 2 or 3 options where it's natively built in, but they're B550 boards. If you want an X570 board and you want Thunderbolt 3 on the motherboard, the only option is this one, the ASRock X570. This actually has 10 gigabit Ethernet and it has Thunderbolt 3 built in. Now that's good for me because it means that I don't have to use an additional network card for that. Frees up a PCI Express slot for me to perhaps add another capture card into my PC. This is quite a boring looking board though. You know, I don't know how good the PCB is, the board, but it's got no RGB, so it doesn't go fast. Of course, you need those flashy lights, but it's quite a plain board, which for some people might be appealing, but I don't know. I thought in some areas this board looked quite cheap, certainly for a £500 board, but you do have premium features here without a doubt. You've got the 10 gigabit Ethernet, you've got the Thunderbolt 3 ports as well. Now, because of this ticking all the boxes for me, pretty much all the boxes, this was top of my list, but again, this kind of comes into where you need to do research. I think if you're looking at any board, once you've narrowed it down to, you know, say 4 or 5, you then need to delve deep and start looking at exactly what these boards offer. And I guess the first step for that would be to look on the website. So you find the official website, and here's what I would recommend doing. Going to the official website, checking all the sales material or the feature list, going through all the specifications and going into detail, checking, does this have all the ports I need? Does it have the Wi-Fi connection I need? Does it have, you know, the Ethernet connection? Does it have Thunderbolt? You have to go through all this and see if this ticks all your boxes. And if it doesn't, can it be added with a network card? And do I want to give up a PCI Express card slot? And then once you do that, what I recommend doing is just kind of browsing around, look at, you know, how often the BIOS has been updated, check the manual, go through the manual, make sure that, you know, everything's okay there as well. Check that it works with memory. You know, every manufacturer has a QVL, a qualified vendor list, I think it stands for, and it tells you which memory has been tested to work. And you might find a board doesn't work well with a particular memory. It doesn't always happen, but it's kind of prudent to check all this kind of stuff. But even then, once you've done all that kind of research, you went, right, this is a board for me, it pays to go into somewhere like Reddit or just check online and look at comments, not just from the reviewers. I think a lot of YouTubers like myself are guilty of just opening up a package and going, hey, this looks great. I do it myself, and I probably will do this with the board. But really, what you want is feedback from people that have used a board for 6 months or a year. Just look at comments from people that use the board. When I started looking at this particular board, I started seeing a lot of people complaining about driver issues, about Thunderbolt 3 issues and different things. Now, I am aware that people that are unhappy about something shout louder than people that are not. And there might be many people using that board that are highly content with that board. They think it ticks all their boxes. They're happy with it. But they're not going to say anything because it's doing what it should do. But I did see a lot of comments from people saying that they had to roll back their BIOS a few versions, that something wasn't stable. And sometimes these things get sorted out in a few months and sometimes they don't. I don't know, but just looking at a lot of the comments, I've kind of been put off by this board myself. And it's a good example of why you have to do research, because when I started looking into this, I started to get put off by it, and I started to think maybe I should gravitate towards something else. So another thing to look at is functionality, and this is where the filters come in here on PC Part Picker. And what do I need to remove here? Gigabit Ethernet. Let's reset that. We'll go back to 51 boards. Now, again, Thunderbolt 3 is not something that everyone is looking for. For me, it's useful because I'm planning to integrate a NAS setup into my home, my setup. I've got a Thunderbolt 3 hub here. I like the idea of having expansion opportunities later as well. You know, a Thunderbolt 3 PCI Express enclosure of some kind to add different cards and different things. I like the idea of having that. Unfortunately, the support for Thunderbolt 3 is not great on AMD. Now, this might change in the future with, you know, USB 4, etc. But right now, Thunderbolt 3, it was an Intel technology, and it kind of is poorly supported here. The best support you'll find for Thunderbolt 3 with AMD boards seems to come from ASRock, as I showed you there, and Gigabyte. Now, none of the X570 boards have Thunderbolt 3 built into them, the X50, 570 boards anyway. None of them have Thunderbolt 3 built in, but they do support the Titan Ridge Thunderbolt card, which I own. So I can add Thunderbolt 3 functionality to, I think there's like 5 or 6 of them that support it. And by support it, I mean that on these Gigabyte motherboards, there is a Thunderbolt controller, and there's a Thunderbolt port for you to put in your cable to connect to your Thunderbolt PCI Express card so that you can integrate Thunderbolt 3 functionality. Now, it's worth pointing this out because Gigabyte, again, you have to check the card, etc. But Gigabyte do offer good support for this, as ROG seem to as well. But MSI and Asus, they're producing some really good boards. They've got, looking at the back of them, they've got some really good ports and different things. But MSI and Asus, despite the fact that they do sell Thunderbolt 3 PCI Express cards, they don't work with their AMD motherboards. They work with their Intel motherboards, but not their AMD boards. I'm not sure why they've made this decision. I don't know if it's a licensing issue. Maybe they have to pony up some cash. I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of boards like this, which are great if you don't need Thunderbolt. But if you do, despite the fact these boards, these companies do develop Thunderbolt 3 cards, they don't work with their own boards. It's just a strange situation. It's kind of weird. But in my situation, it's kind of limited what I can do. So this is a good option as well. It's got 10 gigabit Ethernet here. This is a good option. I'm quite impressed with a lot of the Gigabyte boards in general, I would say, and the Asus and MSI ones all look great. I think, again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. It really does come down to what functionality is important to you. And if you're looking at the kind of higher end Ryzen chips and you're looking at X570 boards, chances are you're a gamer or you're someone who does, think that performance is important. And if performance is important, then Thunderbolt is not an issue, and pretty much most of these boards are, you should be looking at. But I mean, I was talking about this with my friend Paul today, and some of these boards do have additional features, as in they've got certain overclocking features that help distinguish them between the 200 pound boards and the 400 pound boards. Sometimes what you're paying extra for is better overclocking support. That's really what you're paying for. You do get better, higher quality VRMs, higher quality capacitors and different things, but a lot of the time you're paying for overclocking features and overclocking support, perhaps even overclocking support within the BIOS area that you won't find in other boards. And you do have to do your research on this. And I'm not proclaiming to be an expert on this, but you will see, again, if I use this board as an example, you will see that each board has a certain limit with how much memory can be overclocked, at least in theory. Now, again, memory overclocking is not something I'm not totally experienced with, but you can see that this one does support all the memory up here. Now, this is maybe a bad example, but if you check some of the other boards, what they'll maybe say is up to here, it will say the numbers, and then all the numbers above 3200, it will say OC for overclocking. And some boards only support overclocking up to 4000 or 4400. This particular one, because it is a more expensive one, does support up to 5000 megahertz. That does not tell you the full story about overclocking though. You have to get the right balance with the memory, with the board, with the CPU, with everything. There's a lot of things in play there. You also have to think about your thermals and cooling. But if you are going to be doing overclocking, you will be looking at some of these more expensive boards that do offer these additional overclocking features. My friend Paul was saying he was looking at one from Asus, which has got a feature that ensures that when you're overclocking, all the cores are overclocked and not just a few cores, which is something that overclockers sometimes find, where you overclock and just some of the cores are overclocked and the other ones aren't. And again, I'm not an expert on this, but these are all things that you should factor into your decision when you're buying a board. This is why I think PC Part Picker is such a good website, because there's a lot of motherboards to go around to look into here. And it's just not practical to look at every single one of these and say, right, I'm going to look at the manual, I'm going to look at feedback. You do kind of need to narrow things down. And this is where this website comes in handy, because you can say, I want this particular brand. I want it to be ATX or ATX. I want a standard board size or the extended. Or perhaps you want a mini ITX board, which will limit it down to 3. It really makes it easier to find your products. Just, pick what is important to you. And like I said before, start utilizing these reviews. You can sort by ratings. which gives you an indication as to what boards are important. I noticed this one, for example. I think this is the one that Chris from Tech Tablets picked up, and you'll see a lot of reviews underneath here. Great board, and you'll see the different prices from different companies here. You can see there. And you'll see a lot of people who've actually owned the board and they're telling you what they like about it. So that's a great starting point as well. Sort by rating, sort by price, filter by price. 700 is out of your budget, which there's a good argument that it should be. Then filter that out and just say, well, I don't want to spend anything more than $349. And then again, you're down to 36 boards. Just use this to narrow down your search and find the motherboard that is right for you. And yeah, that's what I love about PC Part Picker. It really does make a difficult decision much easier. As far as what I'm doing, I have been flip-flopping a lot. I really do. I really have been flip-flopping a lot on this because I was leaning towards that ASRock system because it does look great. And my friend Mark was saying, well, it ticks all your boxes. Why don't you get it? If it doesn't work, send it back, which is valid. You know, it's under warranty. If it's not working correctly, send it back. But I'm of the opinion that sending a motherboard is an absolute bollock when, you know, you need to take apart your whole system, take everything out, you need to plug it all back in. I'm not saying it's difficult, it's not, it's just time consuming, it's a pain to send it all back. And sometimes these manufacturers, you know, maybe their warranty isn't worth the paper it's written on. You know, they say they offer you a 3-year warranty, but if it takes a month to get that motherboard back to you, you know, I don't have time to be, I don't have that kind of time to be without a motherboard. So that's why I've been looking towards feedback, stability, stable drivers and all that. So I'll keep you all updated about this, guys. I'll be sure to keep you updated when I, you know, pick up all the different components for my Ryzen CPU, 5950X. I'm still picking everything, and I've kind of picked the worst time of the year to do it because prices are a bit high at Christmas and shops are closed and delivery times they're all over the place. But I will get there and I will keep you all up to date with it all. But thanks for watching, guys. I hope you found this enjoyable. And if you have picked up one of the new Ryzen chips, please let me know. I'm still looking at everything, guys. I'm looking at memory, I'm looking at cases. I'm an open book right now as to which components I buy. I will say though, as far as the motherboard goes, I'm kind of leaning towards the Oris Master at this point, which, because again, it's a Gigabyte board, it has support for my Thunderbolt 3 card. Doesn't have 10 gigabit Ethernet, but it's only 330. It's not a £500 board. It's not a £750 board. I'm saving a little bit of money there, which I could perhaps put towards a Thunderbolt 3 10 gigabit adapter in the future. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about all this. Let me know which boards you're looking at if you've got one of these CPUs. And let me know if there's anything you want me to cover specifically in the future when I'm building this PC. But until then, thanks for watching and take care.